We're over at Sandhurst Lake on the Yateley complex, a lake that's most well known for its carp. But in here there's also some really good pike. And we're in the winter now, although obviously it doesn't feel like it with the mild conditions, so it's a great time to be out after predators. I actually arrived at the lake quite late last night. I was really keen to get here. I did fish for a couple hours last night, but no good. Got the rods back out at first light this morning, which is often a prime time for gravel pit pike fishing, and I was lucky enough to catch an early fish. So before we go into the details of how I've tracked these fish down and the type of methods and baits that we use on these waters, we'll get that one out the retainer and have a look at it. Well, this is the first pike of the day. I've caught a few here out of Sandhurst, and generally they're really good looking specimens, but this one does look like it's been through a mangle, to be honest. It's probably an older fish, but it still put up a good fight. Nice fish, caught right out the margin. A little spot that I'll show you in a minute. It got us off to a really good start today, so over the moon with that one. For those of you that haven't pike fished on gravel pits before, when you first get to these big open expanses of water, it can be quite intimidating as to where to start. Now, the first thing that I always try and do is get here at first light. Very often you'll see birds working on the surface, fry showing, so the clues are there as well as the visual features. Now, first thing this morning there was a lot of fry showing on the surface, but one thing that really surprised me was how weedy the lake was. In the past when I fished here, back last winter when we had a proper winter as such, there was no weed whatsoever, and this meant that the fry congregated in certain areas and the predators were all around that area. This winter it's totally different. We've only had one proper frost, despite the fact that it's only a week before Christmas when we're filming this. The result of that is the fry are quite spread out over a wide area, using the weed for cover, and that means the predators are quite spread out too. So I'm adopting quite a mobile approach, travelling light. I've got the brolly up at the moment, the little specialist brolly. Normally I wouldn't bother with that, I'd just go with the waterproofs and a chair, but I do know that there's rain coming in later. I will be focusing generally on a mobile approach, however. First light, there was some fry showing just over my shoulder in the swim behind us, and there's also an inlet pipe here where water runs underneath the bank here and goes in. Where the water's running through there's quite a sort of milky cloud of water coming out into the lake there, and fish will come in on that as well. We're also on the end of the wind, so there's lots and lots of clues that pointed to this swim as a starting point. However, as I said, it is really weedy, and the first thing that I do when I get into a swim on a gravel pit, I use a simple ledger rig without the trace, and I cast around and just drag back and find the areas of weed and clear areas. From a presentation and safety point of view, it's best not to try and cast into the very weedy areas and to focus on the clearer patches. Now, first thing this morning, I had a little plumb around in the swim behind me and actually found just in front of the pipe, maybe a rod length or so out, a little clear patch, put a bait on there and had a take almost straight away. So when you're arriving at these venues for the first time, don't just rush into the first available swim, take your time, look for any visual features, look for the clues, whether it's prey fish, birds on the surface, and then obviously take your time and make sure that you make a good choice with regards to swim and location. In the early part of the day, very often the pike get right into the margins, and it's a good time for getting fish right out of the edge. However, as it's got a bit brighter during the day, we need to try a bit further out, as the pike and the prey fish are likely to push out further into the lake. Now, at the moment, as I've said earlier on, the lake's really weedy. So what we do, we take our trace off of the running ledger setup, and we're going to have a bit of a cast around to try and find some clearer areas. So we can use this to drag along the bottom, to find gravel bars, to find features, to find the weed, and find areas where we want to present the bait, the areas where we think the pike are going to be. Now I'll just show you what I've got here. I've got a ledger stem, which creates this running setup, and that's stopped by the bead, and then a quick change link at the end where the wire trace would be attached. Now when I'm plumbing around just to find features, I take the trace off, because obviously we don't want to be pulling those hooks back through the water. You could foul hook a fish or get it tangled up. Now you'll notice the lead that I'm using is a little bit different. And this particular one is a 4-ounce elevator lead, and I use these for all my pike fishing now. It doesn't matter whether I'm fishing a yard out, as we have been here this morning, or right out in the middle of a big reservoir or gravel pit. I always use a lead of this size. Now the reason for that is this actually creates a resistance-free setup compared to a smaller lead. You'd think logically that a small lead would give less resistance, but in practice, when you get a fish pick the bait up and it pulls the line through this low resistance ring, the lead stays put with a big lead, the drop-off indicator goes, and that creates no resistance. If you've got a lighter lead, the lead drags along the bottom until the drop-off indicator goes, and it's that big change in resistance that finicky predatory fish don't like at all. Also, with these new design ledger stems, you've got a metal ring on the top, and that's really important because with a braided line that we always use, which helps with setting the hook, playing the fish, and also for finding features, it doesn't score on the ring. And then underneath that is a little foam ball, which means the whole thing just sits upright off the bottom like that, again meaning that it's free of any weed or obstructions, so it's nice and free running for resistance. However, we're now going to use this to have a cast around and try and find some spots to position a bait and try and catch another pike. Whenever I'm pike fishing, I always take a selection of baits with me, and one thing that I try and do is replicate the prey fish that are in the water that I'm fishing. Now here on Sandhurst at first light there was lots of small roach topping around the inlet pipe that we're fishing close to. So on one rod at the moment I've got a nice little roach, and on the other one that we're fishing a little bit further out I've got a bluey. We're using half a bluey, and by cutting the bait in half obviously it releases lots of flavour into the water. I've got my cool box with me as well, and we've got some nice herring, smelt and mackerel, so quite traditional baits, as well as obviously the roach and the bluey. Other baits I also like for gravel pit fishing, small lamprey sections as well, are really effective and sometimes can be a good edge on waters that have been quite hard fished. They let out lots of blood and look a little bit different, so nice selection of baits. Now I'm going to show you how I make up a wire trace. Normally I tend to do this at home because when you're out on the bank, when it's cold, your fingers aren't doing what you want them to do and a bit windy, it can be a little bit more difficult. So very often at home, make all the traces up in advance, store them on a rig bin. And obviously depending on the size bait that you're using, you can make them up to suit exactly what you want. So if you're using a smaller bait, you might use a couple of size 8s with the hooks not too far apart. Whereas if you're using bigger baits like I tend to use, you might want to go up to say a pair of size 4 hooks. So let's make up a wire trace for pike fishing using my preferred components. Now the wire that I'm using at the moment is a real game changer as far as I'm concerned, and that's the Rage Predator 49 strand. And I'm using the 40-pound version, which is perfect for heavy duty pike fishing, such as on a weedy gravel pit where we're fishing today. Now it's really supple, and the advantage of that, it lays nicely across the bottom and it doesn't kink up, which means you can use it again and again and again without having to make up lots and lots of traces. So it's really good value for money because your traces last a lot longer. Within the pack you've got the crimps, which are made to fit the breaking strain of wire that you've bought. So the first thing that we do is heat the end with a lighter, and this is a really important part of making the trace. So I'll just do that, and then when we cut it, you'll see that all the strands stay together. It's really important that we do that, otherwise it can fray and we could waste some wire. Now the next thing that we do is put one of the crimps out the packet onto the wire, and then we take the hook. Now for most of my fishing I use the extra strong PowerPoint trebles. This is a size 4. We'll be using 2 of those on this trace, representing a reasonably sized bait. So we put the wire through the eye of the hook and back through again. And we pull that down. And the next stage from there is just to pop the wire back through the crimp. And then we make sure that on the eye of the hook, the wire's sitting neatly, like so. Always make sure that you use a proper crimping tool. Don't just use pliers or something else like that, because they're not designed to do it, and the crimp could then slip under pressure. And the last thing that we ever want to do when we're predator fishing is leave big old hooks like that in the fish. So it's important that we make the trace correctly. So all you need to do is lay the crimp into the gap on the pliers like so, and squeeze it down firmly like so. Always make sure that you're using the right crimps with the right wire. Once we've done that and we're happy with the way that it's sitting, we can just trim the tag end like so. Put that out the way, and now we choose the length of trace that we want. Of course, that's the great thing about making your own traces up. You can choose exactly the length that you want. You never want it too short, because if the pike spins up in the wire trace, you don't want it ending up with the braid or mono main line in its mouth. And on a water like this, where we're likely to be presenting baits over weed, I like the trace to be a little bit longer. So by making up the traces yourself, you can customise them to suit your fishing situation. So again, it's just a case of heating the wire up, and you'll see it go a red colour. You know it's ready to cut then. It only takes a few seconds. Obviously always be careful when you're doing it. Next thing, you take one of these tapered sleeves. We slide our wire through there, down to the crimp, and we pull that over the eye of the hook. And all this does, it just neatens everything up. It's just improving the level of presentation. And I think for a long time, maybe predator anglers didn't think about presentation, maybe as much as they could, but with these new advances in the end tackle that we've got, we can present the baits really, really well. So there we go. So that's how it sits. It's nicely tapered, nothing to catch or tangle up, and there's our size 4 extra strong power point on the end there. We now take the second hook and we simply slide it down. And again, talking about customising the rigs, we can choose the distance that we want. So this is going to be for presenting a reasonably large bait, but we never fish the hooks too far down the bait, because that can result in deep hooking. So there we go, sort of 3.5, 4 inches in total between the two. And for those of you that have ever made your own hair rigs, you'll be really familiar with this. Because this is such a soft wire, we can simply use a knotless knot, 4 or 5 turns like so, hold it in place, back through the eye of the hook. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that method of attaching a hook, and there we go. So that's the top one, pinned in place at the distance that we want it. Now, we talked about keeping the rig neat. We've got this little treble hook cover, which again is tapered on the front, open on the back like so. And we just slide that down, and what that's going to do, that's going to sit over that top hook like so. And that'll just keep everything nice and neat, and obviously with such a soft wire, it will stop it from coming unravelled as well. Now at the top end of the trace, we've got another tapered sleeve. We simply slide that down, that can sit out the way for now. And then we take another one of the crimps that are supplied with the wire, and we just slide it on like so. Get a swivel out. Try to. There we go. So you get the swivel out. Now the swivels that I'm using, they're within the Rage Predator range. They've got a round eye on one side and a diamond eye on the other. The round eye is to attach your main line, and that will spread the load, whereas the diamond eye is for the wire. Now I like using these firstly because they're the only swivel on the market that's actually designed to be used in this way, and secondly, if you use normal round eye swivels, if you've used them before on a trace, the wire can actually damage the swivel, so if you then tied your main line to it, it'd be really easy for it to come undone. So as if we're attaching a hook, it's exactly the same. Put it through once, twice, and then pull it down at the length that we want the trace to be, which will be an absolute minimum of 18 inches and longer to suit the situation if required. It's just a case of popping the crimp back through, making sure it's sat snugly on our swivel, and then again using the crimping tool. Always just check that it all looks nice and neat, and then again we can just snip the end off there, slide that tapered sleeve down, and again at the top end where that's probably going to sit either inside a bead or on a quick change link, it's all ready to go. One little thing that you can add to this as well, we've got the bait fins. Now these are little soft red rubber fins, and these are a really good way of either adding a little bit of colour to your bait, or if you're using quite soft baits, you can put the bait on and put one of those little bait fins on straight afterwards, so you can add colour and also at the same time make sure you don't cast your bait off and give those pike a free meal. Second fish of the day, just off the pipe in the edge again. Pull in a bit this one. We've got weed to the left and right, so we have to go a bit careful. There we go. Oh, another nice fish. Lovely. In the net, almost. And one last go. There we go. Lovely, second fish of the day, happy days. With the fish safely in the net, I'll give you a quick tip. On the end of all my rigs, whether I'm ledgering like we are today or float fishing, I've always got one of these quick change trace links. And once the fish is in the net, you can just take the rest of the tackle off, put it out the way, and that means that particularly on steep banks, on rivers, you're not trying to carry the rod up and down, anything can get damaged. The rod's out the way now, and we can concentrate on the welfare of the fish. There. Okay. Another lovely Sandhurst pike caught right in the edge again. Just goes to show sometimes it's really easy to cast beyond where the fish actually are. Lovely fish. Took a couple of hours after the last one. Absolute cracker. Really happy with that. Always keep the fish nice and low. Never want to lift them too high off the floor. And regardless of the time of the year, always take the time to make sure that you revive them properly. So hold them firmly by the root of the tail, and you want to hold on to that pike until it actually pulls away from your grip. Make sure that it's fully recovered. There you go. Shouldn't take too long. We haven't had this fish out of the water very long at all, so it shouldn't take long. There we go. Perfect. We've just put that fish back, and you often find with pike that when you get some disturbance in the swim, such as when you hook a fish, it can really tune the other fish into feeding. So it's always a case of getting the bait back in as quick as possible. Now I've popped a nice little herring on there. I've checked the trace over after the last fish, and with this 49 strand wire, it's really, really resilient, hasn't kinked up, and it's ready to go again. So we just check everything over. And we're going to drop it back in that cloud of coloured water that's coming out of this inlet pipe, because I'm sure the pike are just using that to creep up through into this shallow water and attack the shoals of fry that we've seen earlier on in the day. Also, The other thing I'm going to do is get the other rod and position that a bit further out, because where I've got a bit of flow coming in here, this coloured water's going out maybe 15 yards, and I'm going to put the other bait into the back of that and see if there's any fish at the bottom of the shelf as well. I've got a nice little roach on this one, still in decent condition, got one more cast in it. So what we'll do, I'm just going to underarm this one out to the bottom of the marginal shelf in this coloured water that's coming out through. And what we do, whether we're casting underarm or overhead, whenever we're using a running ledger, we just feather it so that it all lands together, otherwise it will separate in the air. Now when we're fishing with static dead baits, it's really important that the bite indication's up to the job, otherwise you'll end up with deep hooked fish, which is obviously the last thing that we want. So I'll just show you the pike swinger drop-off style indicators that we're using. So these clip onto the bank stick at the back, and they clip up like so, and as you can see, it's got an adjustable weight on the arm, so if you're fishing at long range, for example, and you're at maximum loading, you can move the weight right to the head, and that makes the front end of it really, really heavy. Or if you're fishing close in or want to fish a little bit more sensitively, you can obviously move it further back up, or if you're fishing for smaller, more wary predators. So I'll just show you how we use it. So I tend to pop the free spool facility on so that I can get the tension on the line correct first. And you'll see on the very front we've got an adjustable ball clip style head, and the little bit behind it there is to adjust the tension on the line. Now I always set it to the minimum tension that I can get away with. What I'm looking to happen is when the predator comes down and picks the bait up, the heavy lead stays in place, the fish swims away, and the drop-off indicator falls, setting off the bite alarm at the same time. So you just clip the line in like so, turn off your free spool facility, and it will just sit underneath like so. If you get a bite and the fish moves towards you, the indicator will obviously fall down like so. If the fish moves away from you, it'll come out and gives that nice satisfying clonk against the bank stick, so that you know you've got a fish on the end. So bite indication is really, really important. And for those of you trying it for the first time, the carp style indicators, and certainly anything designed for fishing more slack lines, isn't really suitable. So it's worth investing in a couple drop-off style indicators for your predator fishing. Often get asked why people use such heavy gear when they're pike fishing. And I'm going to talk you through the reasons for that and the tackle that I choose to use. We're going to start with a main line, and the reason for that is, for me, it's the most important part of the tackle. I'm using 50-pound Horizon. It's a semi-buoyant braid, which means it sits just underneath the surface, doesn't catch the toe on the surface, and it's only 0.3 diameter. That means that you can still cast a lot further than you could with a mono of the same breaking strain or less, and it's got great knot strength as well. It's also a nice camouflage pattern. Now 50-pound line probably does sound a little bit excessive, but as I've already said, it's a very low diameter. And it means that if the fish go into the heavy weed that we've got here today, we can get them back out. The last thing that we ever want when we're predator fishing is to leave two treble hooks inside a fish. And it's really important that obviously by using the right tackle, we avoid that at all costs. So we've got the 50-pound line. The only time I wouldn't use a heavy braided main line would be as if I'm fishing over rocks, because quite simply, braided lines don't go well over stone, over rock, that type of thing. In that instance, I'd probably choose to use a very abrasion resistant 18 or 20-pound normal monofilament line. Now, reel wise, we've got 10,000 size EOS free spool reels. The reason I choose a reel of this size, I want to remain mobile. I don't necessarily need a big pit style reel, but the spools on these are still big enough to allow me to make good long casts, but they're nice and light for carrying around as well. Now the rods that we're using, these are the new Rage Predator deadbait rods, and the models that I'm using here are 12 foot 2 3/4. Now these have got a different action to the rods that you might use for carp fishing. They're a lot more through action, they're more forgiving, and the blanks are designed primarily for use with braided lines. So they're absolutely up to the task that we're using them for here. Now within this range, there's also a 3 1/4 pound test curve model, and the time that I use that is when tackling the big reservoirs or fishing at much longer range. However, for smaller waters or fishing at close range like we are here on Sandhurst, the 2 3/4 model is absolutely perfect. The tackle might seem quite heavy, but like I say, you can never go too heavy when you're tackling big pike in snaggy situations. Well, as you can probably see from the light conditions, we're giving it right till the end of the day today. In fact, this is about as late as realistically we can film, so I thought I'd give you a quick update as to how we've got on. Now, during the afternoon, we did have an inquiry, a really gentle little tap on the tip, and when I reeled the bait in, there was no pike there, but the bait had some visible slash marks on it, so that probably kept us in this swim a little bit longer than I'd normally stay here. Normally when I'm gravel pit fishing, if I've not had a run within a few hours, I'll keep moving, look for those features that I've mentioned during the day and try and find the fish. However, it's been a great day's sport here at Sandhurst. A couple of absolutely lovely fish. Fingers crossed, might even get another one before the end of the day.